Welcome to this morning's presentation from Wax Digital, entitled The Network Economy, Innovation in the Age of Integration. Everybody hear me okay to start off with? Good stuff, thank you. All right, just to kick things off, a very quick couple of slides about Wax Digital. For those of you that don't know us too well, we are a source-to-pay provider. We've been doing this since about 2001, so the last 16 years or so. Blimey, how that flies. We've built over that time a pretty sort of international client base, albeit that we're a UK business, but we've got users in about 102 countries worldwide, some 250,000 or so of those users. We are also a Gartner Magic Quadrant visionary company for those of you that matters for. I think we're about one of 14 organisations worldwide that features in the latest MQ from Gartner in the visionary quadrant. And I guess the thing that's most relevant and important to us in this slide is the 98% client retention figure in the middle, which we very much hope comes as a consequence of great software, well delivered, but long-term relationships that we try and build with our customers to deliver value, again, over many years with those organisations that we work with. And as I said, we are a source-to-pay solution provider. So we started about 16 years ago with a catalog management piece of software. That was where the company was born, if you like. And we built out of that down into sort of the downstream software element of the suite, so purchase-to-pay, as that became over the course of the next few years. And since then, we've been building out that application suite, all natively within our application area. So it's not grown by acquisition or bolting different software products together. It is all designed, developed, delivered, hosted, maintained, managed by us. So it is a broad suite, but built on a single code base that covers the entire source-to-pay kind of life cycle. One of the things that differentiates us somewhat from other organisations, and really, I guess, is the central theme of my presentation this morning, is our kind of unique integration capabilities. So we have also developed over the last 10 years what we call an integration platform as a service, which is our Web3 Connect product, which is kind of a middleware layer between us and other systems. Now, integration with back office systems is pretty much a given for source to pay. There's one or more finance systems usually, and pretty often other systems such as maybe stock and stores, data warehousing, single sign-on, those kind of things. But what's often less appreciated is the important part that integration in a wider context can actually play in accelerating and maximising the returns on a software investment in eProcurement. Which brings me, I guess, nicely back to the subject of the network economy. And to kick things off, I know it's a bit hackneyed, sorry, to start off with something out of a dreadful motivational poster, but please excuse the reference to this old African proverb, if indeed anybody in Africa has ever said this. But if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It does rather nicely encapsulate what the central thesis of my talk is today, which is that going further together. And that's all about sort of great software is, of course, reliant on a great development team listening closely to customers and building applications that serve user needs in a very intuitive, easily accessible manner. But it can't just rely on that. If it does, then the value boundaries, if you like, of that software are always set by the resources, by the capabilities, by the strategic objectives, and by the vision of that one company, the software development company. So to break those barriers down and to amplify the value of a platform, and again, I use that word very consciously, platform, software makers and indeed buyers like you today need to be very conscious of what we might term the network effect and how you can significantly enhance the value by leveraging applications, services, data providers that are connected to the platform that you're investing in. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's start with a couple of examples that are kind of off-sector, so outside of the procurement space. We as an organisation, Wax Digital, we use a platform called AHA, which is a management platform that allows us to manage our product roadmap. So it makes it very easy for us to be able to organise our work streams, our work packages, to aggregate feedback from internal stakeholders and from customers, and importantly, to map our tactical objectives, so what are our short-term development deliverables, against our overall corporate strategic goals, against our product and business objectives, so that we can make sure that they are always aligned, that we're not developing just for the short term to meet specific customer requirements, but that we have a genuine vision for the product, and that everything that we're doing feeds into that vision for the product. So this is a great tool in and of itself, really, really helpful for us to be able to manage what is quite a complex product roadmap. But the value to us within our business is massively amplified by then the fact that that application is integrated with a wide range of tools and other applications, some of which we also use. So things like Visual Studio, for example, which our development teams use for code building and code management, or Slack, in the bottom right there, an employee collaboration platform that you may have heard of, which, if you believe their hype, is the fastest growing business application in history. Why? Why is that the fastest growing business application in history? Because it's very useful in and of itself, but again, in no small part, that's thanks to the fact that Slack actually integrates with another 1,000+ applications outside of its own environment. Another application on there, Salesforce. I'm sure, probably many of the organizations in this room today use Salesforce as a customer relationship management tool. And again, that's another hugely successful company. This is a 10.2 billion revenue business this year, reaching 10 billion faster than anybody else ever. $65 billion market cap organization, but that's not what's interesting to us as a potential customer or as a customer of Salesforce. It's actually a byproduct of what is interesting. Why do 200,000 organizations use Salesforce as their CRM? Why do they pay a premium for Salesforce as their CRM provider? Partly, yes, because it's a great piece of software and massive development gone into it, but also largely because of something that Salesforce calls Ohana. And Ohana is the Hawaiian word for family. So they see that as a family, obviously, of customers, for one thing. Important that we get customer input and feedback into our product development. But Ohana, in terms of family of networked adapters, networked applications, networked services that they bring to bear on the Salesforce platform. So last year, there were 4 million downloads through Salesforce of other people's software that is aligned, integrated with, adjoined to the Salesforce platform. So you can see that the value proposition there is very substantially underwritten by the Salesforce customer base. And that's people downloading things like from an application ecosystem, things like Map Anything, which allows you to say, okay, well, where are my customers geographically? Things like DocuSign, which we have integrated with our platform for electronic signature management, digital signature management. Things like LinkedIn, which is obviously the CRM or customer acquisition tool of choice for digital marketers in the B2B environment these days, and things like Dropbox as well. And just to underline this point, Salesforce Einstein, which is the artificial intelligence tool set for Salesforce.com, turned one last week, and to celebrate that, Salesforce Ventures actually announced a $50 million fund to encourage startups to build AI fuel applications on top of Salesforce. So there's a clear imperative behind not just let's go and find, but let's also, even actually in this case, help bring into being as many extensions to our core product as we can, because we know our customers fantastically value and benefit from that ecosystem. So it's the Apple effect, really, or the Android one if you prefer, where the value of the device in your hand increases exponentially as a consequence of the ecosystem that it supports, or in fact that supports it. That is what we mean by the network economy. So, somewhat interesting, I hope, but how does it apply to procurement? Okay, well, if we go back to our kind of helicopter view of the Web3 solution landscape, when I first introduced this slide, the focus was very much on kind of integration with finance systems. And, that's not a question of adding or maximizing value. It's simply a necessary part of the process to ensure that data is passed securely and reliably between generally a P2P system and your finance system or systems at the other side. Now, that's not to say that it's not hugely important in the success of a P2P solution. Of course, it really is. But it's a very basic kind of network where we're really only looking at a couple of stakeholders or systems talking to one another. So what's really exciting to us is the potential to drive then a heck of a lot more value by tapping into an external network of systems, applications and services that you might already use, or maybe you don't currently use, or you may not even have heard of, but that can all add value to your initial software investment. So let's take a look at a couple of real-world procurement examples. If we take our Shoreditch architect here, putting the finishing touches to the designs for a new chain of avocado and quinoa cafes. Now imagine his surprise and delight if the wrong version of those documents, those design documents, is sent out with a construction tender. That can lead to obviously to some potentially embarrassing, if somewhat amusing outcomes, but it can also end up with some potentially very dangerous outcomes, and notwithstanding that, some very expensive ones too. So wouldn't it be great if the procurement system, the procurement team could just actually reach out from within their tendering system, grab the latest CAD files from directly within the CAD drawing software, and bring those into the tender document instead of relying on email or on shared servers, or some other means of trying to make sure that actually they've got the latest, most up-to-date, most accurate document instead. And using Web3, we have clients who do exactly that in the construction industry. Take another example in a different sector. We do a lot of work in food and hospitality, and this actually highlights another point also worth making, which is the increasingly kind of verticalized nature of procurement. When we started 15, 16 years ago, and until quite recently, I would say, procurement software, best of breed e-procurement software, was a very horizontal kind of application area. Our customers come from pretty much every vertical sector you could imagine. But as we see procurement technology move more and more into direct expenditure, which is a real trend that we've seen over the course of the last couple of years, so vertical capabilities become increasingly more important. Customers are looking for the benefits of a broad procurement platform where you've got effectively you're benefiting from the shared experience, the product investment and involvement of hundreds of different procurement directors in dozens of different industries, but also twinned with kind of the functional capabilities that are very specific to a particular vertical need. So in food and beverage, as an example, you get a lot of issues like substitution. I've ordered own brand baked beans and they don't have any, so they just deliver me Heinz baked beans. You get things like catch weights where I'm ordering in packs, but actually I get charged by pounds and ounces in weight, and I have to try and reconcile these two factors. There's a lot of discounting and markups and regional promotions and those kind of things. So the facility to be able to actually accommodate those kind of nuanced buying behaviours in individual verticals is becoming really quite important in a lot of these sectors. But coming back to our sort of network economy principles, what's important to me as a chef or a catering manager? Well, obviously, an easy-to-use system, an intuitive ordering system that allows me to get my food order out quickly and easily. But how about one that also integrates with my menu management system, for example, so that I can easily translate menu plans into purchase orders? Cuts my management overhead massively, but also helps me to reduce all these costs that we see on the right-hand side here, which is as a consequence of food waste. So very often because I'm over-ordering or I'm mis-ordering. And again, with a system like Web3, you can do that. Another example, in the NHS, the Holy Grail is all about patient lifetime costing. So how much does every patient visit actually cost us from the moment that somebody is brought into the hospital to the moment that they leave? And that involves a very broad understanding of cost, effectively. Everything from what drugs have been consumed, to what procedures have been undertaken, to how long staff took on those procedures, to the type of artificial hip that was used, for example. And bringing all that data together means integrating a very wide range of legacy systems. But the potential for commonalizing processes and driving savings as a consequence is absolutely enormous. And I don't need to tell many of you what the necessity behind that in the NHS. So there are some quite obvious sort of value maximizing opportunities from integrating procurement systems with other applications that you've already got, that you're already using within your organizations. But there's also, of course, applications that you don't currently use, or even maybe don't even know anything about, but which could actually transform some of your processes. So a simple one, again, a simple example of that might be a geolocation service. So that when you're going to tender or when you're making purchasing decisions, it's simple and straightforward to visualize or filter suppliers within a certain radius of a particular site, whether that be a manufacturing site or a building site or a local depot, whatever it might happen to be. So therefore, contributing to KPIs for the use of local suppliers, reducing transit costs, cutting emissions, and obviously cutting the environmental cost to supply as a consequence. And what about a service, for example, that allows you to take a current supplier in any given category and to instantly find other suppliers that look very similar to it, not based on SIC codes or standard comparatives, but based on crowdsourced data covering 17 million companies, which meant you could see the entire universe of competitive businesses in a supply chain and get a personalized score on each one against your criteria for things like size, for risk, for financial stability, capabilities. You know, wouldn't that kind of thing transform supplier discovery? Again, those are the kind of services that we're integrating to on behalf of our customers. So the network effect can amplify value via integration with applications you've already got and applications that you don't have yet. It can, of course, also apply directly to your supply chain. So a lot of vendors in this space boast about kind of their supplier networks. You know, what they're generally talking about when that is the case is how many suppliers use our supplier portal. And there's a marginal benefit in that. You know, when it comes to supplier onboarding, when it comes to supplier data maintenance, but it is very marginal. It's not difficult business process to log into a supplier portal, whether that's 1 or 10 supplier portals. What makes a very real difference, however, is deep vertical supply chain integration. So by way of example, our Web3 suite, as I mentioned before, includes a middleware platform. Again, that word platform, called Web3 Connect. And that's designed to transform integration from an opaque, a complex, a difficult process into really something that's very much the polar opposite of that, a transparent, simple, efficient process. So we start by providing integration performance visibility right from the dashboard, widgets which show exactly what is happening with every interface and allow each one to be controlled simply. And then when it comes to building new interfaces, we've got a simple graphical library where I can search across hundreds of established connections to finance systems, to suppliers, to data providers, to other applications. Anything at all that we've integrated with previously exists then in that library to be able to call upon to create a new interface with. I can then choose a message type, in this case simply purchase orders, invoices, but could be all sorts of different message types, obviously. And then an endpoint, so I have the two sides of my integration pathway, from a supplier, let's say, to, in this case, the Web3 e-invoicing system. Building a route, which is what we call this in a very simple term here, is that easy. It's that simple for us to do. And then making any changes to the detail of that route so that the kind of the connections at a data item level is done through an intuitive, to developers anyway, point and click mapping tool set. And because of that, we can quickly automate effectively entire industry sectors. Coming back to food and beverage, you know, our top food services and hospitality clients have on average about 76% of their transactional value in direct spend. So, you know, the food and drink spend, which underpins their ability to deliver a service, transacted through fully automated machine-to-machine integration of orders and invoices between them and their key suppliers. So by extension, if you're a food services business, we can typically enable, and again, by which I mean fully integrate, not just engage via a portal, better than 80% of your food supply chain by value, almost straight out of the box. And that's incredibly powerful and value-adding when you consider how important and time-critical those communications are. So returning to the title of today's talk, all the things I've talked about so far are innovations that we've already delivered. So I just want to take a look at a couple of network economy outcomes which are kind of still to come, things we're working on now which are going to be delivered to customers or which we expect customers to benefit from in the coming months or years. There's already a lot of talk about artificial intelligence in technology circles, as I'm sure you're well aware. And we already employ AI to an extent to help with some things like suggested cost center coding and guided buying and such like. But we're really excited about the next generation of integration technologies where we can move from that kind of intuitive but ultimately still manual process that I just outlined in our software to a largely or even actually completely automated, we might call intelligent integration platform, where we can simply point one system at another and rely on the technology to be able to identify the constituent elements of the message on each side of the table to intelligently create an automated interface between those two systems. There's also a lot of talk about a technology called blockchain. Now, blockchain isn't exactly new, but it has gained a lot of currency in recent times. Most notably for enabling the development of new forms of currency such as Bitcoin. Bitcoin exists in what's known as a trustless landscape. So if any of you watched the series Startup on Netflix, which is pictured here, if you're wondering why on earth this picture is here, about the creation of a new cryptocurrency where trust was in very short supply. That trustless concept is quite apt. But it is an interesting concept, blockchain. It's where effectively you don't need central banks, you don't need trusted oversight of transactions, because the distributed nature of the ledger that keeps a record of all those transactions effectively guarantees the integrity of that record without the need for an independent authority, which lowers what you might call the cost of trust. And the same principles actually apply to things like storage. So you see blockchain-based cloud storage companies like Filecoin raising hundreds of millions of dollars from investors. And their premise and their promise, if you like, is that you can buy storage from unknown vendors without having to worry about losing data, without having to worry about security. So your data is actually distributed amongst many, many servers and providers with a unique cryptographic fingerprint, which allows you to piece it back together when you need it, including kind of an inbuilt redundancy, so that if any of the hosts disappear or they default, then it's still possible to actually piece that data back together from the remainder. And that actually suddenly renders dedicated server farms, it renders ISO 27001 compliance and all the data standards that we all work to and security standards pretty much redundant, actually, if it comes to pass. So the irony is that having spent years kind of convincing IT directors that it is okay to trust us to put the technology into the cloud, building a strong security story around that, to the point where now those same IT directors can't even imagine deploying anything that isn't hosted by someone else. You want us to look after this? You're kidding, aren't you? The future of applications and storage, the next stage of this part of the network economy, might effectively be no applications or storage at all, at least not a physical manifestation of them in the way that we currently understand it. And that throws up some challenges. I mean, imagine trying to construct an IT tender or IT contract with that in mind. And now to close on this exploration of the network economy, let's remember that integration needn't just be about software and services. It can also mean hardware. I mean, after all, we are living in the age of the Internet of Things. So I brought a little virtual assistant with me today in a very high-risk strategy. Yeah? And it is an example of how we're working on what we now call touchless interfaces, because the most intuitive user interface ultimately will be no interface at all. I think it won't be a huge amount of time before the idea of engaging with software via a dedicated device like this, via a keyboard and a mouse, becomes quite anachronistic. And we'll see ourselves doing things like asking, Alexa, what kind of organizations use Web3? Oh, I need to log in first. Alexa, open Web3.
Tomorrow in windy Kentucky, you can expect
See,
sunny weather
there you go.
with a high of 29 and a low of 14.
Alexa, open Web3.
Welcome to Web3. You can ask me about your recent spend. support, invoices, or just about me?
Alexa, what kind of organization uses Web3?
Only the most intelligent and innovative organizations in the world, like everyone here.
Alexa, what was the most expensive thing we bought last year?
The marketing team's bar tab. I hear it was a great party, but sadly I wasn't invited.
Alexa, what was our total spend on IT last year?
Total spent on IT in 2016 was £832,815.22.
There we go. Alexa, create an order on Web3 for a box of C5 envelopes.
Your order has been created for a box of 50 C5 envelopes from Office Depot.
Fantastic. And Alexa, how much time do I have left for this presentation?
You are about to overrun and you lost the audience about 5 minutes in. I would cut your losses and bring it to a close if I were you, Daniel.
Thank you. Sound advice, I'm sure. Okay, so just a demonstration of... there we go.
Bug-free. This is thanks to the sterling work of our world-class development team.
Yes, absolutely. Isn't that right, Sarah? So as I say, sound advice, but that's where we see a lot of our activity going over the course of the next few years, looking at those artificial intelligence and touchless interface kind of development areas. But to move back from that, I guess I will wrap up now. The one thing that I would like to kind of leave as a takeaway, if you like, is to forget about blockchain to some extent, Bitcoin and Alexa for now, but do think really carefully about how you can transform, how you can seriously amplify the value of your software investments through integration, because as we said, integration equals amplification, and hopefully I've given some kind of evidence to how that is playing out across different software areas. So ultimately, by getting applications, systems, and services to work together more effectively, we can, to return to my initial African proverb, get not only much further, but also get there much faster too. And I very much hope that we get to work with some of you on that journey. Thanks very much for your time this morning.